All right, hey guys. I'm Christian. I'm one of the Google Cloud Platform student innovators on campus. So yeah, just a little blur about what Google Cloud Platform is. They have a lot of cool like hosting your web app stuff. They have a lot of cool APIs that you guys can use. So I'm just here to advocate for that. So you all get like $50 credits on it. And if you sign up, you get a cool T-shirt that I will give out to you. So please sign up for one of these, and I'll come around passing them out. Thank you.
Okay, so I know we usually have food ready in the beginning, but Papa John's oven broke and they shut down for the day and told us 30 minutes ago. So there's McDonald's on the way, so it'll come in the middle of the presentation. We'll give you guys a break to go get the food, but we're sorry for the delay, but I think McDonald's is better anyways. Do you wanna?
First thing, please sign in on that link right there at the bottom. We use that to keep track of attendance and pay for food. Also, so Lily and I, my name is Wesley, we're part of HACK. We're a student organization here where we focus on software and CS interest, and this quarter, we're planning on hosting several different computer science related events. We're trying to host a puzzle hunt event, and we're trying to recruit members to help us organize these events. So if you're interested, please visit.
There will be an event going out. Well, there's an event that just went out like a few minutes ago. It's called Hack Spring Recruitment. And also, if you look at the Hack Night event for this, our website is in the link. Okay, so we'll get started with the presentation. What we're going to do today is first we're going to go over resumes and give you guys tips for what you should put on them. And then we'll talk about what to do at a career fair in terms of like what you should say, how to prepare, and how to follow up with companies. And then finally, we'll go over some interview tips and also outline what the interview process might look like. And if you guys would like to stay afterwards and get your resume reviewed, we will also be here to do that. Okay, so a resume is used for a lot of different things, but we're going to focus today on using a resume to get you an interview. But you should also know that at various steps in the process, it will also be used for your interviewer to ask you questions about what's on your resume, and also to make a decision when there's a committee looking at your resume and trying to make the final offer. So this is just a list of things that you should have or shouldn't have on your resume. It's pretty basic, and like you could probably guess most of these things. But things I would point out are, if you're in computer science or tech in general, you probably don't need a physical address on your resume. Most companies hiring new grads will just assume you're willing to relocate, and they're not going to mail you anything. And you should also keep it down to one page, as is pretty standard for any type of resume. The GPA is in the maybe section because I would say if you have a 3.5 or higher, it should go on the resume, but if not, that's up to you. GPA isn't super important for tech in general, but if you have a decent GPA, you might as well put it there. Also, if you guys have any questions at any point, just raise your hands and it'll be fine. Okay, so this is just an example of a header. Your name should be really big, and one cool thing about tech resumes is that you have a lot more freedom in the design. Like for business resumes, usually they need to be pretty standardly formatted. But in tech, you have more freedom to do that, and you should also be using your resume to stand out. So if you talk to someone at a career fair, they might remember you just because of your resume. And also when you apply to places online, people might be like, oh, I liked your resume. Like that might just stand out to them just because you have certain designs. But we'll also talk about resources for you to build your resume if you're worried about that. So the contact info is just email, phone number, and if you have a GitHub or a personal website, it could be good to link there. But just so you know, recruiters usually won't look at that. Like they only spend a few seconds on each resume, so they're probably not going to be looking into your GitHub pages or your personal websites, but your interviewer might do that. Next, you should have your education. So whatever school you're going to, what degree you're trying to get, your graduation date, and then, like I said, GPA. So for the degree, you don't necessarily have to specify any minors, certificates, or double majors if they're not relevant to the job you're applying for. Like, use your best judgment. If you're applying to a tech job, list your computer science major or minor if you have that. Besides that, it doesn't really matter. So skills is another section you should have on your resume. It's usually not one of the main sections, but it can still be pretty important. It's obviously used like by a recruiter or even by like a software program to see which candidates are qualified for the job that they're hiring for. So sometimes companies will just have software like look through your resume for certain buzzwords, and that's how they'll filter out who they want to move to the next stages with.
What is your opinion on like where on the resume the skills section should go as far as position?
Typically the skills section I've seen like go at the very bottom of a resume, or if you have like a resume with a sidebar, like a left side column, it'll go somewhere there. Yeah, so as you can see, you can add things such as like maybe languages or frameworks you've worked with, or specific tools or experiences. If you're applying for like design or PM position, you might want to list like Photoshop or Sketch or InDesign if you have experience with those things. So it's pretty helpful to have a skills section because it'll hit those buzzwords and get the software to recognize you, but don't put buzzwords that you're not comfortable talking about. Because when your interviewer looks at your skills section, they're probably going to ask questions. Like if you put Python in your skills, they might expect you to be able to answer Python-specific questions, and so on.
So in terms of work experience, you want to keep it in reverse chronological order, which means the most recent should be on the top and the least recent should be on the bottom. And then for the headlines, you want to have the company name, your position title at the company, and the dates of your employment and the right margins. And the dates of employment should be the month of your start date and the year of your start date and the month and year of your end date. And for the bullet points and what you describe, you want to describe what you did and how you achieved it and why that matters. And a big part of this is highlighting your impact using action verbs and numbers. So for example, on this, a poor example of this would be under Google. This resume says, worked on improving the Android setup experience. Now, having a Google software engineering internship is a great experience, and this is a quite vague bullet point, I'd say. And there's a lot of things he can improve to really highlight his experience there. And a better example here would be right under Groupon. He says, implemented TripAdvisor ratings for hotel and getaway deals in Groupon's Android app with 50 million plus users. Now, this is a great thing because implemented, action verb, 50 million plus users. That's a great number to highlight the scope of the audience that he impacted. But one way I would improve this bullet point would be if he could find some concrete metric to describe his impact, such as maybe the TripAdvisor ratings that he implemented helped increase the user engagement by 30%. That would be a great thing to add onto the resume, and recruiters would love to see like how your code actually helped the company and impacted them. And then lastly, try to make sure that what you're saying is understandable for someone that doesn't have your same experience. Because if you're the one working on it, someone who didn't actually work on what you did might not understand it, and most recruiters don't actually have a tech background. So if you put a whole bunch of jargon and all these tech jargon stuff, they're not going to understand it. So try to be understandable and also relevant to the work experience you have. Okay, for extracurriculars and side projects, pretty much the same thing as work experience. You want to really highlight your impact. On this resume, he does a really good job right under the Pocket Lock Android app. He says, learned and applied principles of mobile development, UX, and graphic design to successfully release app to over 140,000 users. So pretty much the same thing. Really highlight your impact. That's super important. And also, again, try to keep it relevant to what you're applying for. So if you have an activity that doesn't really, and you're applying for a software engineering position, and that activity that you're a part of or student organization doesn't really relate to software, then it probably isn't something you need to put in your resume. Okay, so if you have too much free space, one thing you can do is play with the design, try to mess around with the margins, and a lot of times, actually, it's better to have some free space and keep your resume cleaner and less cluttered. That can actually be a good thing. Another thing is if you actually don't have enough stuff, you can just go do something. You can join a student organization like Hack. You can do a side project, run for an executive board position, stuff like that to really give you a better, well-rounded experience. And an important thing is keep track of the things you do as you do them. So one thing you can do is update your resume every month or something like that, because a lot of the times people only edit their resume right before they apply. And that means that they'll forget a lot of the things they actually did the year prior and the experiences they gained and what they actually worked on during a project. And so when you do these things, try to keep them down and keep note of them so you remember them when you actually edit your resume. Some of these things like write down what were your responsibilities, why does what you did matter, what are the impacts of your work, stuff like that's really important. And so if you don't have enough free space, one thing you can do, remove older, less valuable, or less relevant experiences. Cut out unnecessary words, especially for bullet points that have, for example, like if you have 2 lines and the second line is 1 word, try to cut words from those bullet points first so you can save space. And then another thing you can do, just try to start from a blank slate and then just add your most valuable experiences and then just stop when you run out of space. So that way you can cut out anything that isn't important. In terms of styling, especially for tech positions, a little bit is okay, but a lot is probably not. So something like that on the far right is probably too much unless you're applying for a design position. In that case, that might be appropriate, but something in the middle would be like perfect if you're applying for a software engineering position, because that actually adds some flavor to your resume and makes you stand out a little bit. But something on the left, like a clean Microsoft Word resume, is always okay, and that's pretty much appropriate for anything you're applying for. So some resources on how to make your resume. Microsoft Word is always a classic one, and you can find a lot of great templates online, and that's pretty standard. So if you're comfortable with Word, Word is a great thing. Credle.io is something I would suggest. They're a great site. They have great templates that you can use, and you just pretty much input your experiences, and then it spits out this resume with a beautiful template. So that in the middle is actually made on Credle. So you just go to credle.io and you just sign up, and it's free, and you can make amazing resumes on that. So that's what I would suggest. You can use Photoshop and these other tech stuff if you know how to use them, but if you don't, that's totally fine. Another big thing I would suggest is VMock. So a lot of companies, especially big companies, your resume won't even be seen by recruiters until it's filtered through by a machine. So if your resume doesn't even make it through the machine, they're not even going to see your resume, and there's no chance you're going to get an interview. So what I would suggest is when you're done editing your resume, put it through VMock. Just go Google VMock. It's free. You can put in your resume, and it gives you free analysis on how you can improve your resume, and it gives you a score on how well your resume scores against other students at Northwestern. And I would suggest to aim for a score of above 90. That way you really increase your chances of getting a recruiter to see your resume. And it also ensures that your resume is readable by a machine, because that's also very important, because if it's going to be read by a machine, you can tell if it's going to be good and not filtered through.
Okay, so now I'm gonna give off some career fair tips, and this is gonna be mainly targeted towards the startup career fair, since that's next week. And I'm personally like a very large supporter of it. Like I got my first internship through it, and I had a really good experience. And I've seen it work for a lot of other people. But a lot of these tips can also be applied to career fairs in general. So in preparation for it, the first thing you should do is polish your resume, which is why we just went over that, and just come prepared, print out copies. It's never too like it's never bad to print out too many copies. You can just use it again later. But if you run out of copies, it might be a problem. So I would just like err on the side of being more cautious. There's also resume paper. If you want to be a little bit more formal, it's like more like cardboard, just a little bit like less flimsy. And that could make a good impression. You don't have to use it. But definitely like try printing it out not an hour before the career fair, because sometimes like it's going to print out and it's a little slanted and it's not going to look great. And it's presentable, but it's not preferred. Also, you should look at the companies that are going to whatever career fair you're planning on going to, especially for the startup career fair where a lot of the companies you probably have never heard of. It's really good to just go on their website and figure out like what's the gist of what they would do. First of all, because you don't want to waste your time talking to a bunch of companies you're not interested in. But second of all, if you approach them and say like, hey, I like looked at your website and I saw that you did this, they're going to be really impressed already just because you took in the effort to figure out what that company does. It doesn't even matter if you don't totally understand what they do, but even getting the industry right and asking for more information about it can be a really good first impression to give to somebody who's working at this table, especially when a lot of people probably won't know. Next, you should also practice your elevator pitch, which I'll go more in depth in very soon. And you should also follow up with the people that you talk to. There's like so many people out there who come and table at career fairs, and they're just like shocked at how little people follow up with them afterwards. So even following up, if your resume didn't stand out to them, following up is that second chance at like still pursuing something. And it's also just nice to do. So this is when the startup career fair is. It's next Wednesday, 12 to 4 at Norris. They typically have a bunch of software dev positions for both interns and full-time. And there's also usually like marketing and like creative content stuff. I don't think the companies are up yet, but it's usually pretty cool. The startup I work at will be there if you want to talk to me about it. I'll probably also be at the table. Okay, so this is a super standard, like basic elevator pitch and what you should have on it. So obviously you should have your name. You should have your year. So like I'm a second year student or I'm a sophomore. You should have your area of study if it's relevant. Like this is the same thing as I mentioned for resumes. Like if you have a minor in like music and you're not planning on doing anything with music, like for the position you're looking at, then don't mention it. But maybe if you're applying to like Spotify, you would obviously mention that you have a minor in music. And then position is, you should mention to the recruiter as soon as you start talking to them what you're looking for. Because like if you're looking for an internship and they're only hiring for full-time, then that's something that you want to clarify right away. It doesn't mean that you can't keep talking to them, but it will lead to a much more productive conversation for both you and the recruiter. And then this last part is what I mentioned earlier about looking at the company's website or figuring out what they kind of do so you can leave an impression on them. And then the statement of interest and passion is just, you should always clarify what you're interested in terms of software development or product management or like back-end development, front-end development, or even more specific, like if you're passionate about education technology, specify that. Or as specific as you can, as long as it fits with that company, that's what you should go for. Maybe don't say you're passionate about ed tech if you're applying to like a health tech company or talking to them, but your judgment. And then you should ask a question at the end. Usually, can you tell me more about this? Or do you have these positions available? So what we will do is like take a few minutes. So whoever you're with, like just practice an elevator pitch about yourself. And if you guys have feedback, just give it to each other. It's really good to practice this before you actually go to the career fair. Alternatively, if you don't want to practice with a friend, go to the booths that you care less about first. Like if you're going to career fair and have a few companies in mind, don't go to those first, because it's good to go to some other ones first and practice and get warmed up. Even if you have practiced your elevator pitch with people, it's good to use this strategy just so like by the time you get to the booth you're really interested in, you're like in the zone and you're ready to talk to them. Okay, so if nobody has any questions, why don't you guys like just either pair off or like you can go with your tables and just like go around and try to practice your elevator pitches.
It's gonna be a while.
Yeah, she said she would be here when?
She said 30 minutes at 7:17. So that's
I mean, as long as it
7:47.
shows up at some time while they're still here.
Hey,
You
he's,
put a
he's,
cover
he's in
photo?
hack now.
Nice. You
I
can.
asked him. I was like,
Do you want to be?
Wesley, should I? I guess so. Why don't you tell me more? I don't really know.
Hmm?
You practice your elevator?
Are you going to the startup career fair?
Yeah.
Nice.
Wait, like the garages are like the hostels?
It's the same. The garages is like startup matchmaking. Is that the one you're going to?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Should I go to
Well,
that?
you already have a job.
Is it?
But I mean,
Can I? Is it
if
bad?
if you would you? It's actually it could be worth it, but also would you work like during the school year? Because you could do that too.
Probably not. I have too much.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to dress up for this, right?
Also, if you guys are waiting, now would be a great time to go get a T-shirt by signing up for Google Cloud Platform. But continue. Yeah, poor guy. I can't believe people don't want T-shirts.
Yo, I'll sign up. I want to get a T-shirt. Wait, where's the sign up thing?
You have to go to him.
To make it
Also, I'm already signed up.
Huh?
I'm already signed up, but I want a shirt.
Oh, really?
Are they Google Cloud Platform shirts?
It's just like the logo on the front of the shirt.
A cloud? I would still
Oh, wait,
do
no,
that.
it's like the circle thing.
Ah, that's so cool.
You're in Katy, right?
Yeah, why?
Do you know Diana?
Roden?
Turkey.
Oh, yes.
She's like one of my really good friends.
She's so nice.
Uh-huh.
I work with her because I like work in a position that's under her.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Isn't she like new member
Yeah.
something?
Yeah, I'm on like a group of people who do new member ed.
Oh.
She's so nice.
She's always like super busy with that.
But
Yeah.
you can't be on .dev and hack at the same time.
Wait, yeah, we're having like major conflict right now.
I'm not on .dev.
Dude, look at what Sam is sending Jody. He's so rude. Okay, so
Who is Sam Fang?
he's
He-
here.
Yeah, he's okay.
Okay, but he basically asked Jody like.
Wait, the mic's off, right?
You stay in your slides and tell us everything.
Wait. Okay, so continuing. Okay, so once you guys have your elevator pitches down, it's still important to keep like engaging the conversation, obviously, because they want to learn more about you. So the first thing you should try to do, or not necessarily first, but at some point in the conversation, try to get the recruiter your resume. Sometimes you can literally just walk up and like while you go for the handshake, like just give a resume, and like a lot of recruiters will be fine with that. Sometimes they might just ask for your resume at the beginning, but if you don't give it at the beginning, I would just say like, give it at the end, or ask like, can I give you my resume? And sometimes a recruiter literally might just say no, and don't take that like offensively. Sometimes they just want to like, they don't bring the resume, but they might give you a link or like send the resume here. So if they say like not to give you the resume, like it's totally okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But try to drop your resume as many places as you can. Typically, recruiters also have like 2 different stacks or like a few different stacks for resumes. So like there might be a shorter stack, and that's like the list of resumes that they're going to look at the end of the day when they're done. But don't worry too much about that. So better ways to get recruiters to think you're like good or someone they want to work with is hype up your experiences. So like if you took EECS 330, you might have built like the world's worst project, but just talk about it and make it sound better. Like think back to when you pitched your project and just pitch it again. And tell them you built it. And you don't even have to say it was for a class, and you don't even have to say it was in a team project. Like just say, I built this thing, and like it's not lying, it's totally fine. And then maybe if they ask, like, I mean, they're not gonna ask, but if they asked, was it for a class, then obviously be honest, but they won't ask you. Like the more you can talk about things that you've done, or even if you worked in this project and you only did like a specific part of it, you can talk about everything in that project. It doesn't have to be just what you worked on. And just like list whatever frameworks you've used, whatever languages you used or tools you used. If you did user testing, that's also really good to talk about, because that's just more of a design process. And also at startups, you're likely going to be doing more than just the development, especially if it's an early stage startup. And then, yeah, so you can also talk about like other class projects that you've done, especially like if you took Intro to AI, there are a lot of cool things in there you can talk about, like building a Sudoku solver or whatever they do now in that class. Besides hyping up your experiences, also just show interest in the company by asking questions. And so like this goes with this last thing on here, asking about more about what they do. You can also ask like, what would someone in the intern position be able to do? What are your goals for the next coming year, or what do you guys hope to achieve at the end of the summer? Just learning, not only showing interest, but also learning about what you would be doing if you did decide to work there and end up doing that. So use the conversation as a way to get as much information as you can, but also show the recruiter that you're interested in like seriously considering their company. If you can get a business card, get it. And if they don't have a business card or they ran out, try to get an email, because this is super important, or else you can't really follow up. So at the end, you can ask for contact information, and you should also you can also ask, if you're interested, what next steps would be. Like, should I apply? Should I submit my resume somewhere? Just figure out what you should be doing. And something I do is, like, I usually just write on the business card, like, submit here if they tell me specific steps. And also, so when you follow up either the same day or the next day as best as you can, but don't follow up like right after you talked, because that's really weird. Like, wait till the evening or wait till the next day, and remind them who you are. So hopefully you had a conversation that was memorable, or like you talked about something very specific, and you should reference that in your email. So you can be like, hi, like, I had a wonderful time talking to you, or like, thank you for talking to me at the Northwestern Startup Career Fair. It was really cool to hear that you guys did this. And if it's something specific enough, then they'll be like, oh, this is the person I talked to about that. And that's super helpful. If they didn't like your resume, they like that you followed up, and now they know exactly who you were. And it's also helpful just to attach your resume right away, because it saves you like a back and forth email, like, can you send me your resume? Obviously mention that you're attaching your resume, or else it's just like sitting there. Cool, so that's like the best tips I can give as to how to succeed at a career fair, especially at startups. Like, if you guys don't have something for the summer yet and you're looking for something, like, this is a really, really good opportunity, even for someone who has no experience in whatever you're looking for. A lot of startups are looking for people with the opportunity to grow and people who will be able to learn fast and are just interested in what their company is doing. Does anyone have any questions on that? Cool. We'll get back to this. Oh, actually, yeah, so when you walk up to the recruiter and you're saying hello and introducing yourself, the handshake is pretty important. Like, sometimes they won't go for it, but you should just like extend your hand and offer to have a handshake. My best tip for a handshake is when you reach out, you should squeeze your pinky, and basically the webbing, like by your hand here, should be touching the webbing on their hand. And you don't, yes? You can walk up here. Okay, so you guys can practice in a second, but yeah, so your webbing should touch the other person's webbing. It's like, it'll be natural, it doesn't matter. But the part that I think like helps have a firm handshake is like squeezing your pinky. You don't want your handshake to be super limp, but you also don't want to be super firm. So do you want them?
Oh, and some other tips. Wipe your hand discreetly on your pants before you shake their hand in case your hands are sweaty, because no one wants to shake a sweaty hand. And like, also pay attention if the recruiter like has a whole bunch of stuff in their hands, like clipboards and stuff. You probably don't want to like shake their hand, or else it'll just be awkward and they'll have to put stuff down, and that'll be an awkward start to your conversation. So just like pay attention to that stuff, like if you should go for the handshake or not. Sometimes you don't have to, so.
We'll watch this video when the food comes in about 10 minutes. Okay, so hopefully the career fair went well and you have an interview. So what will usually happen is a recruiter will probably call you, and just like, it won't be technical if they're calling you. They're just trying to figure out, like, learn more about you and maybe figure out where you might fit in the company, blah, blah, blah. And then you'll have like some combination of like behavioral and technical interviews. So what we're gonna do now is like give you tips on behavioral interviews and also outline the process of what a technical interview might look like. Especially for startups, it's usually different. So we will talk about that.
So a huge part of the hiring process and the whole interview process is actually the behavioral questions. And the behavioral interviews or behavioral questions will typically happen during the recruiter phone call or during the on-site as well, and typically both. So I'm sure a lot of you know what behavioral questions are, but some common questions are like, tell me about yourself, how did you solve a problem when working with the team, tell me about a time you failed, why do you want to work at this company, or give me 3 of your best or worst personality traits. And it's very important not to overlook behavioral questions, because increasingly a lot of companies are actually weighing behavioral interviews more. and it's actually a very important part of seeing if you're a good fit for the company and a good fit for their culture. So I would definitely advise you to really drill down your behavioral questions before you go practice technical interview questions. And one of probably the biggest key to success to behavioral questions is understanding and realizing that all behavioral questions essentially boil down to the same 5 to 10 questions. And what I mean by this is that a question that an interviewer is going to ask you is always going to be a variation of one of those 5 to 10 questions. And this is a great thing because if you just prepare for those 5 to 10 questions, you'll essentially know how to answer anything they're going to ask you. All you have to do is know that this question is a variation of this question, and I can answer it with this answer that I've prepared. So one tip is you can go on Glassdoor. You can just Google Glassdoor, your company name that you're applying for, and interview questions. And typically there will be other applicants that have put up past interview questions that they've gotten. And especially for smaller companies, recruiters and companies typically will ask you very similar questions. So if someone else got asked it, you're pretty likely to be asked the same question because they're trying to learn the same things about applicants. So that'll give you a very good way to prepare. Second, you want to try to tell a story whenever you're answering these questions. And one big part of that is embellishing, but not lying. So what I mean by this is you want to be able to tell a story with the whole conflict, how you resolve that conflict, and what lessons you learned. And actually, I'm sure a lot of you have taken DTC, right? So DTC is actually a great source for all these stories that you can tell in your behavioral questions. For example, so a bad example of telling a story would be like, say an interviewer asked me, tell me about a conflict you had when working with a group. I could say, freshman year, I had a DTC group. We came up with this design, but our group disagreed on it. And then we surveyed some people, and we agreed upon the highly voted one, and we got an A. That would be a terrible story because you don't really highlight how you solved the problem and what happened. A good version of that story is I said, so I tell the story about how all freshmen have to take DTC here, all engineers have to take DTC, and then I talk about, so we had this design project where we had to come up with an innovative layout for a classroom, and I had this idea. I proposed the idea to the teachers, but they hated it. And because the teachers hated it, my group also hated it because ultimately the teachers were the ones that were going to grade our project. And so we had this huge dilemma in our group, and ultimately we decided to just come up with different layouts for the classroom and propose these layouts to the client that would actually use it. So we went to the school and we gave these layouts to all the students that were going to be in the classroom, and we surveyed all of them to see which layout they liked the most. Ultimately, they decided that they liked this layout the most, and we showed it to the teacher, and because of that, and they saw that the client liked it, they loved it, and we had a great final presentation. And this whole experience taught me that when you're given a conflict in a group setting, it's the best way to resolve it is just to test as quickly as you can, put out something, test and iterate on it so that you could get that feedback loop going as quickly as possible. And that's a great way to answer the question because you tell a story that's memorable. They'll remember that story. They'll remember you for it. And you throw in some buzzwords. Tech companies love iterate, feedback loop. They love that. And testing too. So throw in some buzzwords in your answer. And then lastly, if you're a person that doesn't really do well on thinking on your feet, I would really, really suggest to think hard beforehand and even write down some answers. And try to even memorize them if you want to. Really rehearse these questions so you can really polish your answers, and that'll actually really help your confidence when you go into these questions and answering them.
Okay, so the next part is about technical and phone interviews. So I've split it up into two different types of interviews you'll probably have for the technical screen. So super common for like more established tech companies are coding challenges. So HackerRanks, they'll just send you a link and give you like some sort of deadline. They're typically like 2 to 3 hours or 1 to 3 hours, but there are some companies like specifically Twitter will give you 2 weeks to do it. Thumbtack will give you 2 weeks to do it. And it's not that it takes you 2 weeks, it just they understand that you have other things going on. But these are actually super convenient to practice for, not super easy. But basically, they'll have like a coding development environment for you, and you just have to solve some interview questions and have them pass the test cases. And they're super easy to practice for because you can use sites like LeetCode. LeetCode actually, if you like just spend a lot of time on LeetCode, do a bunch of practice problems, you'll probably never be surprised by an interview question you get, whether it's a coding challenge or a phone interview. Like LeetCode has almost everything that a company might use or throw at you. Obviously, it takes a lot of time to go through all those problems, but just being familiar with those types of questions is really good for these coding challenges. But the second part, or the second type of technical screen you could get is a take-home assignment, which is much more common for startups. And what that is, in my opinion, it's a lot better of an interview practice because it's going to be more representative of what you might be doing on the job and also more representative of someone's coding abilities rather than just memorizing how to do some LeetCode problems. They'll typically ask you to build a simple application, make a few API calls using their documentation, and they'll give you like a week or 2 weeks or whatever and just ask you like, do this and then send us the project when you're done. Some companies that do this will also ask you to document your process, the decisions that you make, and this can be really good for you to show like your design process and what kind of things you put into consideration when developing something. And then if they decide to move on to the next stage of the application with you, oftentimes they'll like ask you to come to their office if it's a local startup, or they'll ask you to get on the phone and talk about the process of building this app. So you got to talk about like everything that you did hands-on. And don't let this scare you, even though it is like making a real application. A lot of the stuff is learnable, even if you've never seen it before. So just because they send you a coding challenge or an assignment that you have no idea how to do, just take it step by step, use Google and Stack Overflow, ask your friends for like advice. Don't ask them to do it for you. And they're usually very doable. So don't get too nervous about that. Phone interviews usually will be similar to the coding challenge in terms of the types of questions they'll ask, but that is typically after the technical screen, especially for larger companies. They use the technical screen to filter out applicants so they don't have to spend as much time talking to people. So usually the interviewer will introduce themselves, and you should actually listen to this part because later you can ask them questions. For example, they'll typically say what team they work on at the company, and that can be good for you to understand and ask questions like, what do you do in this team? And then they'll ask you questions just to get to know you. This usually isn't the behavioral interview part, but sometimes it might be. Typically, they just want to understand like what knowledge you might have or your level of experience. And then it'll be a technical interview similar to the coding challenge problems that you can see on LeetCode. That usually takes 35 to 45 minutes. It could be one problem, it could be two problems, it could be one simple problem, and then they'll ask you to like go back and make it more optimal or add a new part to the challenge. But whatever you do, you should always talk out loud about what your thought process is. Even if you don't know how to solve the problem, just telling them, I'm thinking I might need to do this, or I'm thinking about doing this, they might steer you on the right track. The interviewer is not trying to like make you fail. They want you to succeed. So they're going to help you work through the problem, and the more you can collaborate, the better, because they want to see that you're someone that would work with people well. At the end, again, you want to show interest and learn about what it's going to be like to work there. So you should ask whatever questions you can about the company, about the interviewer's experience, and things like that. Some good questions to ask are like, what's a typical work day? Or like, do you hang out with your coworkers outside of work if something like company culture or like team culture is important to you? Like, does your team get lunch together? Because that's not always how it is. And like at larger companies, it'll vary from team to team, but it's still a good idea to get some kind of experience from like a first-hand person. Yeah, so you should ask questions about the company and also about what it's like to work there. But another thing you can ask is like what next steps might be, or like when you should expect to hear back and stuff like that. And after your interview, it's always good to follow up. So similar to following up from a career fair, you should follow up with an interviewer if you have their contact information. If you don't have their contact information, don't like hunt it down because that would be creepy. But like send them a follow-up and thank them for their time, because these are people who like work and spend most of their time coding, usually if they're a software developer, and they take time out of their day to interview people, and that's actually like some people don't like doing that. Okay, so for applying and getting these interviews, career fairs are great, especially the startup career fair, but alternatively you can just go to company websites, which will be a lot harder to get interviews typically, but there's no reason not to. Like you can literally just sit and in 30 minutes you could apply to 30 positions. So you might as well do that. You can use job listing sites like Piazza, Glassdoor, whatever, or like, yeah, AngelList. Intern.supply is a really good resource because they actually have a list of all applications and direct links to them for each company. And they'll tell you where the companies are hiring and if the applications are open or not. I would say as a later resource, you can message recruiters directly. So like you can just Google like Airbnb recruiter LinkedIn or Airbnb technical recruiter LinkedIn and just like find a recruiter's LinkedIn profile. And a lot of times in their bio, it'll say we're hiring or I'm looking for this. And then you can try to reach out to them and contact them. And a lot of them will even have their emails in their bios. Those are typically the ones that are more receptive. If they don't have anything in their bio about hiring, they're probably not going to reply to you. And then finally, you can use CareerCat and McCormick Connect. I can't really speak to any of those firsthand. Yeah. Okay. So that's all. But the food is coming. Is it here yet?
It's here.
Oh, the food is here. So it'll be up the stairs in a few minutes. We're really sorry that it didn't come earlier, but it was really out of our control. Just never go to Papa John's again because Domino's is better. Thank you. But we'll be here for a little bit. If people want to get their resumes looked over, we can give you guys tips on how you can improve it or tell you that it looks great and it's ready for the career fair. And also, if you just want to talk more about anything that was covered in this presentation, feel free to ask us. You can Facebook us or do whatever. Also, I work at a startup who's looking for a data scientist full-time, so talk to me if you're interested. And I'll also be at the Startup Career Fair. Are you guys ready for food? Okay, you guys can come get food. If you're vegetarian, I think you can only take fries or a fruit and yogurt parfait. So hopefully you're not vegetarian.